TV. It's a rainy morning here in Kampala. Most places have actually received rainfall this morning, which is a blessing. At the start of the day, when you start it with rainfall, it's usually a blessing from God above. My name is John Jimmy Musimbi, and you're watching the Daybreaker Morning Show here at the Elections Analysis Center Record TV, which is the hashtag of UG Polls 2021. Now, this morning, we shall not be discussing politics, but we shall be discussing education, examining and tracking the relevance and the performance of the Uganda Primary Education Universal Primary Education, which is UPE. With me in studio, I'm joined with a lady who is a senior research analyst and a researcher known by the names of Hilda. She's a research associate at Uganda Date Network, which is one of the NGOs that we have here in Uganda. So we shall be interfacing and going into the deeper details of that as we continue with the discussions on our social media platforms, Record TV Uganda on Facebook, and at Record TV Uganda on Twitter, and Record TV Uganda on YouTube as we continue with this discussion. Now let me give a chance to this lady to say hello to the viewers of Record TV. Good morning, Hilda.
Good morning, Musimbi.
How is the weather taking you?
The weather is cool.
Really?
Yes. It's a cool morning.
Oh, that's good. How is Uganda Date Network?
Uganda Date Network is good. Greetings from Uganda Date Network, actually.
Well, thank you.
Yes.
Say hello to the viewers of Record Television.
Good morning, our dear viewers. Once again, I'm Hilda Tumuhe, a research associate with Uganda Date Network.
Well, I understand you carried out some research in regard to the universal primary education, but I hope the technical team can get me a story that was aired yesterday in regard to the research that was carried out by Uganda Date Network before we actually move on to this discussion. High youth unemployment and social cultural beliefs have continued to peg back enrollment in the universal primary education, retention in school, and responsible for the poor performance in national examinations. In a meeting attended by participants from local and national levels in Ntinda today, Uganda Date Network highlighted the key findings in this report.
This grant is still insufficient to support education for these children. If we can increase the per capita of the UPE capitation grant, we can get much more milestone from UPE, just as the other government programs.
Mary Juliet Tumuhairwe, the head teacher, Uganda School for the Deaf Ntinda, decried of limited capitation for the special needs pupils in the institution she heads and asked the government for more funding.
The grant is not enough. And being that our school is a special school, we have less number of children probably where if they calculate it at per child, we really get little money.
But what do the head teachers in the districts where the research was carried out say?
The research has been good, and it is if implemented by the government, it will help our schools.
The Assistant Commissioner in charge of primary education, Tony Mukasa, welcomed the findings and pledged to have the issues resolved by the Minister of Education.
Some of the problems that have been earmarked in this report include funding. And this is a continuous lobby. Even in the coming financial year, government has already promised extra funding. I think a child will be raising from the 13,000 to 17,000.
Well, you've just seen that story clearly. The Assistant Commissioner in charge of primary education there, Tony Mukasalusam, trying to respond on behalf of government towards the report I personally shared with him. He welcomed the findings in the report. He actually says all the findings that were put on paper are actually true, and he highlights many of them, among which was funding as the most evident one affecting universal primary education. He talks about lack of feeding for these pupils, and he also says that government is actually planning to increase the fee from about 13,000 to 17,000 per pupil. So basically there were many people. We talked to some of the head teachers from Rupa Primary School in Moroto district, and they also gave in their insights, just as you've seen in that story. Now this morning, just as I told you, we have the lady herself here, the one you watched in that story, Hilda Tumuhe, who is the research associate at Uganda Date Network, to ascertain the situation at hand and the process in which they came about with this. So Hilda, I would love to understand in deeper details, what was the basis of this research? How did Uganda Date Network come to carry out this research?
Okay. First of all, we as Uganda Date Network, we are an NGO, as you stated before, and how Uganda Date Network came into existence was due to the debt relief, when we fought the debt relief campaign in 1996. So after achieving the debt relief, this came with a cost. It came with a condition that this money should be channeled to the Poverty Action Fund. It is from this point of view that we decided to look at these resources, how they are being put into use. So we follow up on these resources. And one of the major programs that have benefited from the Poverty Action Fund is the UPE itself, the UPE program. So, but we realize that UPE has achieved several results in Uganda today, including we are seeing the enrollment rates have increased right away from 1997 to date, at least from about 5.3 million to about 8.7 in 2017. So, but still, due to this increase, there are many problems that came up, e.g. few teachers, the number of pupils have turned up.
Before we get to that, what do you make of the general view of the program? Of the, we shall measure on UPE probably, but generally, leaving aside the research you carried out, I just want a general view of the entire program across the country, because your research was centered in a certain region. What's your overview before we get to some of the findings?
Okay, my general overview on UPE, it's still lacking, especially the per capita income allocated to the schools through the capitation grant. 13,000 per pupil for a full year is really very inadequate, whereby we realize that this 13,000 cannot really do much. If I'm to go to a bookshop today and ask for the cost of a textbook, most bookshops will tell me it's around 20,000, yet per capita is 13. Not only the scholastic materials as well. This role of scholastic materials has been left in the hands of the parents, but you realize that parents are so poor that sometimes they cannot even afford a book. Yeah, meanwhile, some of them can afford, but there are those other few schools, actually not few, the majority of the schools in the rural areas, parents are so poor that they cannot afford. So I wish the per capita income should increase for UPE, then we could achieve remarkable results out of it.
I would love to understand, you carried out a report and some of your key findings talk about people thinking that this education is actually free entirely, and such an attitude is affecting the program. How is it affecting the program?
We realize that most of the parents in Uganda today, especially the rural parents, think that UPE is actually totally free. But UPE is not totally free. Parents need to also pull a hand as government is trying to help our children go to school. So this has affected parents in a way that they become negligible, that they fail to provide even a pen to these pupils. Some parents are poor, yes, but others just don't take on the responsibility to take these children to school. Because, say for example, a region like Karamoja, a parent will be like, why would you study? You rather go for pastoralism rather than attending class. So you find that this has affected the education sector so much that when pupils lack books and all that, they don't find a reason why they should be in school, so they end up dropping out just because the parents are negligent.
You talked about in your report something to do with the high cost of secondary education. How has this affected? Where do the two connect? The high cost of secondary education vis-a-vis universal primary education. Can you highlight and make the viewer understand?
Okay. So for the high cost of education, we notice that some parents have a tendency that since secondary education is very high, why would I leave my child in school yet they will stop at P7? They will not attain university, they will not attain any tertiary institutions just because the cost of USE is still high. So if we would subsidize the cost and bring it down a bit, just as government has intervened for UPE, and if they intervene as well for USE to provide most of these requirements for USE, then it would be a better deal. We really appreciate government for that, because we've seen in a number of parts in the country whereby government has set up seed schools. Yeah, so if we continue with this attitude of setting up more schools for USE, at least it will improve the parents' attitude against secondary education being high. Because if the parent has hope that my child will attain secondary education, then they push hard to push this child through primary education.
Many organizations do carry out research. Which reason would you give one to credit your research in the way it has been carried out? What best methodology have you used? Or what tools do you think, which reason would you give for somebody to credit this research and probably Ministry of Education taking it up?
Okay, so the methodology, we use the statistical methods, of course. That is simple random sampling, and we based in Karamoja, where education is really a problem, that one we know, and Acholi. So we purposively sampled the two regions. Then from the regions, the schools we contacted, we sampled them using simple random sampling methods.
So do you think, as you carried out your research, do you really see relevance of universal primary education within the communities, or it's actually a time-passing activity like many call it? Some say the girls go there to pass time as they await marriage. Some of them say boys go there as they wait to grow and probably go do some other manual work. What did you reveal? What did you find about the relevance of UP in the communities down there?
Okay, so UPE is really relevant. It's not a pastime program, because we've seen remarkable output out of UPE, including the output, the literacy rates have gone high. Yeah, so we cannot just say that it's just a pass-by program. It has actually achieved some of the results, but we just need to put in more to achieve the best of the best.
Okay.
Yes.
Can you paint a picture of the overview of this research you carried out? Probably because we started right away from the key findings, but of course there are many issues in that report beyond only the findings. Can you paint a picture of the overview of this research you carried out?
Okay. The biggest issue we found out during this research was the little per capita which is being given to these schools, because most of the school, remember the school facilities grant is no longer running, so we are only left with the per capita, the capitation grant. So it implies that some of these factors are going to affect the program, whereby when you look at the building, the desks, the classroom desks are worn out today because the school facilities grant is no longer running, and the per capita grant is as well so small that it cannot fund all this. It cannot look at the day-to-day running of the school, then the infrastructural development of these schools. Then another big issue in these schools was hunger. Look at a region like Karamoja. Without the school feeding program by World Food Program, trust me, there will be no education in Karamoja. Because when you find these little children in school, they all have plates, cups. So the major factor that pulls them to school is food. So we as government, how can we see that without World Food Program, schools can still run on, UPE schools can still run on in Karamoja? Therefore, at least for that, we look at the school gardening model. If government can adopt it, whereby these schools have vegetable gardens, they can grow a few cash crops to feed them, to feed these pupils while in school, it will be a good deal for them. Then another issue was about the seasonal attendance in school, whereby parents have a poor mentality that during the rainy seasons, they will pull these children from class to go and babysit as they dig in the gardens or as shamba boys in these gardens. So they end up not attending school fully. So this affects their performance rate. A child can appear in school for just a month, then later they disappear to the garden for maybe a week or two. So by the time they come back, they cannot catch up with their fellow pupils who have been in school full time. Then the other issue was about the teachers. Some schools have very few teachers, yet the enrollment is very high, especially for the lower primary classes. You find in lower primary, when we have over 200 pupils, yet we have only one teacher in this class who is going to take through these little ones. So the learning rate cannot be so good in such an environment.
Your report also highlights about the performance of these. What percentage do you actually find vis-a-vis the students who are not in UPE? Because somewhere you highlighted a 47% that contributes to the poor performance. How are they performing? What are some of the key causes that are bringing about the 47%?
For the performance, at least we term it as moderate, because amidst all these challenges in these regions, really, at least the pupils, about 47% have passed on average in first and second grade. So the reasons as to why others are not really performing well are just as the ones I have highlighted before, just like not fully attending class throughout the terms, very few teachers, less instructional materials, and the other textbooks. Yeah, basically. And then we also have early marriages, and dropout rate is still so high. This is affecting the UPE performing so much. And then child labor. It is a very big factor in these environments whereby children are made to work and yet they are supposed to attend class. So this makes them not attend class fully throughout the term. And once a child does not attend class on a daily basis, trust me, their performance will not be so good as that of a child in Kampala parents, whose parent is going to take this child to school on a daily basis.
You actually highlighted that the lower primary has more of these pupils than the upper primary. Why is it so?
Yeah, the biggest issue with that, the dropout rate, is due to, some pupils don't necessarily drop out, they change school. Some of them change school because of maybe repetition. When they've been told to repeat, when they have not performed well, they resort to join other schools. Then others have been forced into marriage. Others have been told to go and dig, to practice pastoralism. Basically, those are the major issues why these numbers are very high in lower primary. Then when it comes to upper primary, a girl is good enough, a P5 girl is good enough when they're married off for some of those communities. So we need to sensitize the masses that they acknowledge the value of education, because if I push my daughter through education for these few years, I will achieve a better result than chasing the girl into marriage at an early age.
You highlighted some of, when you read this report, you realize that actually the retention rate in these schools is really very minimal. For the students that join, the pupils that join from probably primary one, they're not retained in these schools up to the end. You find that the reasons you highlight, people who come out and probably with cultural beliefs, some believe maybe going to school is no longer something of value. Probably some look at the unemployment rate. How have these affected the retention of these students and the program at large?
Yeah, the reason as why the cultures and the cultural beliefs in some of these communities have affected these girls and boys, it's just because they're discouraged from attending school. Because someone told us that when you attend school, you grow up, you go to Kampala and become a prostitute. So they grow up with this mentality of going to school is not worth it, you get? So it is better to do maybe other things like marriage or pastoralism. So this has really affected UPE. And some other cultural practices of early marriage, it is really a big hindrance to the entire program countrywide. That's why I say we still have to sensitize the masses about the importance of education versus early marriage.
Yeah, we're also going to understand, when you're carrying out research, in most cases, there are challenges that you'll always meet along the way that you realize that probably have limited to this. Mm-hmm. So what were some of the challenges you encountered during the making of this research? Challenges that you think can actually be really good probably for making better work ahead?
Some of the major challenges that we encountered during the research were low response rate. Sometimes you would visit someone and they're not willing to.
Low response rate, is it on the side of the students, the head teachers? Expound more on that.
Yeah. For the side of the head teachers, really some of them were not so open to us because maybe sometimes they think you're spies or you're going to take back feedback to the ministry and then they lose their jobs. So sometimes they don't open up very well. But once you expound more and explain more why the fruits of this research, we are able to get adequate information for the research. So basically that was the major issue in the first place. So when we talked to them and convinced them why we did the research, that we shall give back feedback to the ministry in a positive way, such that they can also come in for the betterment of our children, they were able to give us the results.
Where do you think this research probably is lacking, if it is anyway? Because I shared with some of the head teachers in the schools you highlighted in your report, like Roper Primary School in Moroto. I also shared with the Ministry of Education, and they gave their side. But before we get to that, do you think the report has things it left out that probably you think the ministry would have looked at, but maybe due to time or due to limited information, you did not highlight in your report?
I can say the report was really exhaustive. Yes. It has exhausted all the problems. At least you can testify from what the head teachers told you is exactly what is in that report. Because they are the first people to give us first-hand information about the report.
Talk about UPE in schools with special needs. For example, I was speaking to Juliet Mary Tumuhairwe, who heads Uganda School for the Deaf in Ntinda. And she says, for us, because this is a school of special needs, it actually has a limited number of students. And due to that, you find that probably the funding is as well measured on a student, and it's less than 1 million shillings for the entire school. So what were some of your findings in funding in schools with special needs and then schools with students without the special needs?
For the schools with special needs, the per capita grant formula does not cater for the students, the pupils with special needs. This is a very serious problem since most of these children have different inabilities.
Sure.
Yes. So it becomes so hard to put them in the same class. It becomes so hard to educate them. Some of the instruction materials, they don't have them. So it is still a very big challenge. That's why it's still in the report, we call upon government to look at this, which the ministry promised that they will.
So are you trying to say that the schools with special needs which are running UPE program are not being funded by government?
No, they are funded by government, just like other schools as UPE. But the per capita grant formula does not cater for that portion of schools with special needs. Because as we hear the word special needs, then they need special attention for them to achieve the education program as well. So we need to increase at least some percentage of the bit to go to the schools with special need, such that they can also cater for them and they receive quality education.
Well, Hilda Tumohe there for you speaking about the journey of the universal primary education here in Uganda. Hilda Tumohe is the research associate at Uganda Date Network, and the report was carried out in September this year in the northern part of Uganda, Acholi and probably the Lango sub-region, trying to understand how things are moving on, especially in an area that has had a backlash in education for quite a long time. My name is John Jimmy Musimbi. We take a short commercial break. The breaker returns shortly.
Hello, what's up guys? Energy right about now. Ekinde so nakolonze Sugar Arafat sikirala nnyo. Ekinde se kubagamba nti ngenda bakubanga muziki every single day, Monday to Friday. Muketise lunchtime request. Ngakubira obuyimba bw'okyasinza okubanga oyagala kano. Oyagala kano obona bonna nga mbukuŋŋaanyisa wamu ne mbukutuusako ku screen okubanga gwakola listi yange. Where are you? Twitter, ku Facebook, ne ku namba zaffe ez'essimu, ku Record Television, saawa zibiri na musanvu mpaka saa munaana with me Sugar Arafat wanoka.
Kulw'omukwano gwonna kyuka, ne feelinga nga yatuuka, message yo yatuuka, message y'omukwano gwo yatuuka.
As the country prepares for the 2021 elections, different political leaders have vowed to all not to defy odds.
Fight until the job is done or until I am done.
The nation, through different political parties, is in high political flair.
For us, we are going to support you with all our heads, with all our knowledge.
All this is coming up in the UG Polls 2021 from Monday to Friday, 2 p.m. on Record TV.
I got you half a scholarship so that you can go to college.
Oh, but I don't want to go to college. What I want is to be a model, that's all.
Well, you better get your head out of the clouds, because in this country you'll never amount to anything if you don't study.
Mariana, a woman who lives a life surrounded by beauty and glamour, will fight until the end with all honesty to get what she wants.
I like your shirt. It's very pretty. Where did you buy it?
I just made it.
And that will prove her strength to accomplish her dream of becoming a fashion designer.
I want you to work here.
On the other hand, Scarlett, Mariana's younger sister, is an ambitious woman.
When men make the decision to open their wallets, a woman can't give them time to think.
Why do you say such ugly things, Scarlett?
Because I'm your evil sister.
Who, being poor, will have to pretend to be someone she's not.
My daddy owns many properties. He has farms, factories.
To fit in this world of appearances and money and reach her dream.
Scarlett is going to be on the runway tomorrow, period.
Two sisters will have to survive in the fashion world.
What a pretty cardigan.
Thank you.
Well, I suppose it's good for a talented amateur.
A world where they will meet a man that will change their destiny. Roberto White, a successful businessman, a millionaire, but a disaster in matters of the heart.
Welcome back from that short commercial break. If you've just joined us, you're watching the Daybreaker Morning Show on Record TV, the Elections Analysis Center. The hashtag is UGPolls. My name is John Jimmy Musimbi, and we are tracking the progress of universal primary education here in Uganda, trying to examine the capitation for this program versus other options that are around, to see how far we've come with universal primary education and what the journey looks like actually for the primary education. Just in a bit, we shall be letting you to probably call in and contribute to this program. I'm sure the technical team is going to put the number right there on your screen such that you can call in and probably contribute. If you could have a question for this lady in studio, Hilda Tumohe, who is a research associate at Uganda Network, you can put those questions to her such that she can answer them, and you get a glimpse of how this research can actually help you as a parent to better the life of your child who is in a UPE school, and probably any government official that is watching this show this morning could actually get your concern, could actually get your feedback in relation to what you would love to put across. So, Hilda, there were key things. What was the response of government after receiving this report? Do you think they've read and exhausted it? And as you interface with the ministry, of course you had a commissioner there, what was the feedback in regard to the report that you highlighted?
Actually, the commissioner, the face of government, yesterday at the show, he actually welcomed the recommendations in the report. Basically, all the recommendations are facing to one direction. The funding, the financing is still inadequate. And we see him coming up and telling us that government is actually planning, it's in the pipeline of increasing this grant from 13,000 to 17,000. It will still be inadequate even at 17,000, but at least we believe it will make a change. We shall assess it at 17,000 and see what gaps are still lacking. Then we shall still take back feedback to them, as we as well support them.
What gives you that optimism that probably things are going to change? Because what you're talking about is actually not new. Government has always come out and made these promises. How soon do you think this is going to happen? And yes, you've made a report, you've submitted it to them, and boom, nothing happens. What is Uganda Network intending to do? Are we going to have another program seated discussing another research report with its findings talking about the same, or there is something as Uganda Network you hope that you will do in case government does not heed to the call you have made?
As Uganda Network, we shall follow up with the ministry and ensure that we support them as much as we can, especially for community sensitizations, for the parents to come on board as well to support the program, because we cannot leave this role of educating our pupils on the side of government. So if we can sensitize the communities, the parents, to also come up and support the program, we shall also follow up with government, giving our ideas as much as we can. They have always welcomed us. We thank them. And we believe they cannot make promises, empty promises, because we've seen the grant increasing from 7,000, actually from 5,000 lower primary and 8,000 upper primary, to 7,000 a uniform figure, then to 10 and to 13. This has been all effort of civil society organizations. So we believe that government is not tired, and it is looking for the best for the pupils, because our children, our nation. So if we educate a child, it's one of the major, some of the major bases that we can shift from poverty if we educate these children with some basic skills. So it implies that government is not going to dump this report, it's not going to dump these ideas, but they're going to take on these recommendations as fast as possible. So we are looking forward up to that, and we shall still follow up, since they also gave us a slot for following up.
As a senior researcher, I'm sure there are things you foresee. I would love to understand why you think, yes, funding is low, just as you highlight, but what do you think has failed government to actually so much mind about the universal primary education and increase its funding? Because we see there are sectors that are actually highly funded that may not be as important as the education sector, because primary is always the foundation for anyone pursuing education. So do we see lack of probably commitment from the side of government? Do we see poor legislation in parliament that probably low funds have been allocated to this program? Where does the challenge of low funding arise from?
The challenge of low funding is majorly arising from excessive public expenditure. Government is having a lot to spend on, but at least we have hope, since maybe if the NRM government is to come back in power, they are promising they're going to cut these unnecessary expenditures probably. But then we are also pushing hard that we've done a research on the unnecessary expenditures. If government can cut the cost of unnecessary spending, like travels abroad and all those unnecessary ventures, then we can reallocate this money to education. Of course, government has priorities, as they say. Definitely, the biggest tranche of the money has been going to infrastructure. But then it doesn't make sense us building the nice roads, and this girl walks from home to school on a very nice road, barefooted, and they're going to a school to spend the entire day hungry. You cannot study on an empty stomach. We wish government can restructure their priorities and look at the education sector, just as when the UPE program had started.
You highlight a lot of recommendations, almost 2 pages in your report. Can we discuss some of these recommendations as we move towards the end of this show?
We recommend that government can adopt the feeding policy. If we can set up a policy whereby pupils can feed in school, and we currently have a model for the school gardening. So if government can pick on this, and through maybe Operation Wealth Creation, they provide links to some of these schools, then they grow their own food. There we shall minimize the cost of which we are feeding the schools rather than just distributing food. Then we have to also, we advise government that we as civil society and the government, if we can sensitize the masses the more. We cannot do this role alone. If government can also put in more effort in community sensitization about the major role of education versus other programs like early marriage, labor, child labor, and all those other things.
Yeah, before you go to the next point, you talk about sensitization. Now, awareness is something that is very key, because people who are sensitized, people who are actually aware, always make informed decisions that relate to their lives. How best do you think government can make the sensitization? Because it's already there. Where do you think government has failed? How best then can they do that sensitization? Because you leave it open when you talk about, yes, they should do sensitization, which they've already done. But if things are still the way they are, so where do you think it has failed in its sensitization, and what can be improved?
And these mass sensitizations can be done through community dialogues. And maybe another way.
Do you think that hasn't been done yet?
It has been done, but then we can improve.
So then how can it be improved?
We can improve it through making them frequent. You know, when you sing a topic over and over again, at least sometimes someone picks something out of it. So if we can do it frequently, much more than we've done, then that can be better. Then another way we can sensitize the masses is through these schools themselves, whereby they can, these head teachers, we've advised them to always have at least fortnight meetings with these parents and emphasize the major point of the use of education in schools. Actually, that would be the best model.
Yes, because I was looking at community sensitizations. They're a bit tricky, because you could sensitize people who are actually not even students, or people who actually do not subscribe to schools. So I think if actually you advocated more for these students to be met in schools probably during teachers' meetings with alongside the parents and the students as well. I think it would make more sense. The frequency of that would actually, I think, bring out the point better in the sensitization process. I don't know what you think.
Yeah, just as I've mentioned, we advise them and encourage them that if they would emphasize these meetings, call upon parents, they sit with their children in the meetings or separate them. Children give their ideas, parents give their ideas. Then the technocrats advise and give more light about the importance of education. If this can be done much more frequently, I believe these parents will pick a leaf. And another way, through these school-based meetings, they can bring role models. Maybe if I went to a certain school in the village down there, they bring Hilda to Muhe. They tell these pupils, do you want to be like Hilda to Muhe? Yes. They can look at these role models, people who have at least achieved some bit of education in life, who have attained something good, who are in a better position, to talk to these parents about the major roles of education. Trust me, the parents are going to change their attitude towards how they look at education versus other options where they would take their children. Yes.
You are still highlighting more of these recommendations before I interjected in with this.
Yeah, we talked about school feeding, we've talked about the massive sensitizations. Then another thing government can do, if they are to at least increase the per capita, which they have promised to do, at least to 17,000. We shall still follow up this, and we believe...
But in your report, you highlight that you'd love from 13 to 20,000, actually.
Yes.
And you're talking of 17.
17, it's because the commissioner promised 17, not 20.
But of course, if you want the government to give you 17, you should actually lobby for over 25,000, such that you can get 17.
The reason how we come up with the 20, it's an average. From the responses from the head teachers, the feedback from schools, most of them pledged at least 20,000. It will do some work.
Talk about the school facilities grant. It's one of the things you highlighted in your recommendations.
Yes, the school facilities grant is no longer operational, and it was majorly aimed at building schools, classrooms, then buying desks and all that. And you look at these schools now, they're in bad state, most of them. They need to be repaired, and this grant is no longer functional since World Bank withdrew. So if government can at least pick one from what World Bank did and reinforce the school facilities grant, at least the schools will be in a better shape, because these classrooms will be renovated, more desks will be purchased, and all those things.
You talked about probably the low, high cost of secondary education. Don't you think it's necessary for maybe universal secondary education as well to be financed such that it can work as a linkage with UPE, such that people can actually continue in these schools?
Yes, actually, government is actually funding the universal secondary education just because there is limited, exactly, just like UPE. So if government would strengthen the USE as well, parents will have hope that if my child completes the primary cycle, there is hope for attaining higher education in secondary. So if the cost of education in secondary schools is cut short, parents will be motivated to push their children. But as I said, even the parents themselves have to carry on the role of education. However much it is expensive, if government comes in to subsidize for us this cost, then parents should also carry on and take the responsibility of taking these children to school and pay something at least for their children to still be in school.
What in your interface with government, is there hope that probably they are going to improve the situation of schools with special needs, because they are catered for nowhere at the moment in the capitation you highlighted about?
Yeah, there is hope, because government has always come up and committed to. So we just need to keep on reminding them and pushing hard that they can put this in place. If they can at least cater for these schools with special needs with at least a given portion in this as they are computing this grant, then it will be a better deal for them. The teachers will be able to handle these pupils. Actually, government has come in to train. It has come in to train teachers to handle these pupils with special needs. So we hope maybe in the coming years, this problem will be a bit solved.
You highlighted about a report carried out in the COVID-19 lockdown. So I would love to understand that you highlight about the education in the lockdown. These are challenges you've put across, yes, in regard to UPE, but these are the same challenges that have actually disturbed these same pupils for years. So how has the situation been for the universal primary education in the COVID-19 period?
Actually, for COVID-19, it has actually been more worse, because if a child has not understood some concept in the class when the teacher is there physically, remember, government has come up with the radio schooling program, whereby people sit on radio and learn. But actually, up to today, the radios have not been distributed, and some of those homes, they are homes without even a radio set. So some of these pupils have been left out. Then another issue with the COVID-19, since some people cannot access the education on radio, it implies that they resort to other means. And once a child is redundant for a long time, that's why you see the high early marriages rates recorded in these past few months of COVID-19. Just because the pupils are home full time, at least back then when it's time to go to school, at least a parent has it in mind, a child has to go to school, even when they don't attend regularly. But at least it regulates the rate at which they are going to be out of school. So for COVID-19, since the schools have been locked and some people cannot access the media platforms to read and learn, and some parents don't even have TV stations, they don't have radio sets, so it implies that these children in such homes are being left out of education. So really, we call upon government, at least if they can distribute the radio sets, as they said, but still it will be a challenging one, since some of these concepts cannot be understood clearly on radio. So I'm very sure beyond doubt these schools can also do the physical distancing issue, such that these children don't remain redundant for a long time and they go back and learn.
Don't you think, you see, COVID-19 is not about to go, and of course we understand that education is always the background and backbone of the survival of any country, because without education we cannot have good governance, we cannot have good economists, we cannot have a lot runs on education. It's actually the background and backbone of everything. So if we do not have people who are well educated with a very good background, because however much you take your child to a very good secondary school, they may never do their best if the foundation has actually not been the best of it all. So I think some of these things should be prioritized. I don't know whether my technical team can actually put the number on your screens there, such that we can be able to interact with you as we move on with this show. I would be best to be comfortable if I hear from the people out there, what do they think about this discussion in relation to the universal primary education, because this has been a very key issue over the years. Majority of the people is dropping out due to different challenges, early marriages. Some of them actually run away from these schools due to corporal punishments back at home. So there are a lot of issues you can actually investigate that have retarded the development and progress of such a program, which is very key. That is why you realize that back then, during the scholarships that were offered, you find that many students were actually in school, but of late you find that they even have the universal primary education and the universal secondary education, but actually many have lost interest in many of these programs because of the faults in them that couldn't be moving as things are expected. So I think there is need on the part of government to come out and probably highlight and respond to some of these challenges. Otherwise, if we move on just hoping and praying that things will be okay, we keep making calls, they keep, 17,000, however much increased, even if it were 20 per pupil, it wouldn't make sense. But probably it's a good start to keep lobbying from. Otherwise, if the education sector, my call would be that it should actually be one of those that are prioritized, especially at a time when the First Lady herself is at the helm of such a ministry. I mean, everything can easily be done within her power to influence the powers that be, to ensure that probably the funding is given on time, the funding is increased, and many more of these issues at hand that we could discuss about and see. So, Hilda, coming back to you, I understand that probably the country has suffered challenges in education. When you make a report in regard to universal education, probably for the primary level, it's not the only one suffering these challenges. I also understand the entire education sector has actually been hit. Do we see Uganda Network along the way coming out probably to make a report or recommendations or push for the betterment of the entire education sector, because we realize that yes, this could be the foundation that will send the pupils or students to the higher levels. But don't you think that the higher levels as well affect, just as you highlighted, the cost of high secondary education will affect the primary one, and probably the high cost of university education will as well affect the continuity from the level of secondary to the level of university. So what is UDN's preparedness about the future of education in this country?
Yeah, we as UDN, just like we've done the primary one, we go step by step. We cannot begin lobbying for the universities before we look at the primary. So once we clear the foundation, trust me, it will be easy for us to clear the top as well, because we shall keep on lobbying for the increase in maybe the subsidization of the cost of education in the higher levels of learning, just as we've stated in our report, that if government can also come in and look at these higher levels of education to prepare these primary children, once they leave the primary cycle, they can attain secondary. Once they attain secondary, then from there we can gauge their potential if they're to join tertiary institutions or proceed to the A-level section, or after, then the university section. We believe if government begins at the foundation, they cannot leave it hanging. It's like when you are constructing a house, after the foundation, you're pushed. You even have the much eager to reach the roof and roof the house. So after achieving the primary education, after clearing the loopholes in the primary education, which is the foundation of everything, early childhood learning and all that, then we shall keep on lobbying and pushing hard that the entire system changes for the betterment of our children.
I know when you carry out a report, probably a research, and then you make a report, you expect changes to be made in that effect. So looking directly into that camera, share with the audience and probably the people out there your last remarks.
In our last remarks, we are very sure and confident that government is going to take on these recommendations, since they are very welcomed by the ministry, and we are going to continue following up with the ministry. We shall also come in with our sister NGOs to implement these programs and also give support to government as much as we can. Then basically that is what I had to say.
Probably, do you love to probably send an appreciation to Save the Children?
Definitely, yes. We'd like to appreciate Save the Children, because without them we wouldn't have made this possible. Thank you for the continued support you offer to Uganda Date Network. Thank you.
Well, that is Hilda Tumohe for you. She's a research associate at the Uganda Date Network. My name is John Jimmy Musimbi, and you are watching the Daybreaker Morning Show here on Record TV, the Elections Analysis Center. Hashtag is always the UG Polls 20 21. You can always follow our discussions on our social media platforms, Record TV Uganda on Facebook, at Record TV Uganda on Twitter, and Record TV Uganda on our YouTube channel. Now at 8 to 9 a.m., Nora Osende will be returning with the Pan-African movement. The chairperson, Dogarama Daniel, will be here to give you insights about the youths, and probably Newton Balenzi, who happens to be an administrator at the Pan-African movement Uganda. The discussion will be moving on, and later on, probably from 9 to 10, I will be returning with another team to give you insights more in the Daybreaker Morning Show. My name is John Jimmy Msimbi, and do have yourself a lovely morning.